Okay. Thanks, Jeffrey. Right, hello, everybody. So I was mentioned earlier in the day, but for those who don't know me, my name's Tom Gurney. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for what will be NHS Sussex on Friday, but I'm also got the responsibility for public involvement. And before I just talk about that, I just wanted to take the opportunity just to thank everyone in the room, not just for today. It is marvellous that we're all here. I'm still in the mode where seeing live people is a real novelty. So really nice to see you, but I just wanted to thank everyone for what they do for the system. The last 2 years has been unbelievably difficult for us all personally, professionally, etc. But I just really want to recognise that the role everyone in this room has played to support our patients, support our public, to make them safe, literally saving lives in some instances, has been incredible. So I just think we need to recognise that, and we need to keep reminding ourselves. And what I'm going to touch on in a minute, we're all part of the system now. Not that we weren't before, but hopefully we feel more part of the system. And it's really, really important we continue to work together for the best of our populations. Okay, so we've all agreed we're marvellous, but we want to get even better, don't we? So creating excellence. So the purpose of this session here, and hopefully it's not going to take too long. Can I just have the next slide? Hopefully it won't take too long, so we do have an opportunity to talk. So what I want to do, if we go back one, is just build on what has already been said today, some of the sessions from this morning, but also on Jane's session on collaboration, particularly with Health Watch, but also build on the collaborative toolkit that I know has been developed. And I did take the weekend reading all 56 pages, I think it was. Really, really good piece of work. And that will be a key, I think, for Health Watch to work slightly differently with systems as we go forward. This is about recommendations to agree and debate. There is no one size fits all, no one's an expert. So I really do want to have an opportunity to have conversations on your tables, to pick holes in it and actually thrash it through. But what this is about is actually how Health Watch, and I think a lot of it applies for the VCSE as well, can work differently or slightly differently with the system and the infrastructure that we are setting up, particularly NHS Sussex. So what I've done is really split it into 3 areas, okay? So this is Health Watch as a delivery partner. So this is around operational delivery. It's Health Watch as a critical friend, which we've talked about. It's around the independence. And then also around Health Watch as a strategic partner, which we've touched upon. And I've tried to have 3 quite practical recommendations for each one of those. So it's not just me and not just honeyed words about commitment and collaboration and partnership. Actually, what does it actually look like, and some of the things that we can develop. So on the first one, in terms of a delivery partner, so we know Health Watch and the VCSE as well, absolutely key in supporting the engagement work, as Jane has talked about. Really important that this is done in collaboration, not just with Health Watch and the NHS Sussex, but across VCSE and the other partners who we work with the engagement. And I think, Louise, you mentioned this earlier. It's really important that we don't just focus on standalone programs of work. So one thing that I laugh ironically around is we talk about integrated care a lot, and yet we consistently don't integrate engagement. So we talk about people's experience of services being siloed and episodes of care. And yet when we go and talk to people, it's, can you tell me about GP services? Can you tell me about mental health services? Can you tell me about community services? Well, hang on a minute. Well, if I want to talk about all of that or something different. So I think we need to challenge ourselves that we're not just talking about commissioned programs of work, which are very easy to do in my eyes, start and finish, engagement. This is how it's fed into it, and these are the actions we're doing. Actually, how can we do it where it's cross-sector, cross-system, different strategic levels, which is a really difficult thing to do. So in terms of delivery partners, so some of the 3 things that I think what good looks like. So it's having a clear work plan between the ICB and Health Watch. Now, And we've talked a lot about money, but I think this is where the money comes into it, by the way. So having a clear year-round work plan, which is aligned to the strategic priorities of the system, but also aligns to your priorities. And so you know what you're doing. That will help your business model, probably, because you know what's coming up and some of the money that you might get out of the system, if you like. And it will help us, because then we know what we're collaborating on and some of the programs of work. Secondly, it's around what programs and pieces of work that Healthwatch need to be involved in. So that's probably the capacity conversation, isn't it? Now, my reflections are, whenever there is some piece of work or a task and finish group, we always say, oh, we need Healthwatch in the room. You're victims of your own success sometimes, because there's only so many hours of the day, isn't there? And sometimes I do feel for particularly David, Katrina and John, who we work with very, very closely, that the amount of meetings, the amount of programs, pieces of work you've got to be involving is astronomical, isn't it? So it's about getting a better understanding around where you should be involved and where you add value. You're not just in a room so we can tick a box. And then lastly, it's what I touched on, is about feeding into that wider pieces of work. So how can you collaborate? And I talked about the money, but this is where we need to be slightly grown up, where a lot of pieces of work go beyond just what Healthwatch can deliver or should deliver. Some of it goes beyond what just VCSE can deliver, or some of it goes beyond what the NHS Sussex or the NHS as a whole can deliver. How can we collaborate for commissioned pieces of work? The reason I say that needs a grown-up conversation is because sometimes when money comes into it, then we can often see the worst of people, can't we? Because it's the money conversation. So how can we do that differently? Okay, so that's us. That's Healthwatch and VCSE to some extent as a delivery partner. But what about as a critical friend, which we've talked about? Hang on, I'm just going to get my next slide up. So we talked about critical. Is it coming? Critical friend. What does that actually mean? Now, for me, there is a fine balance between, I'm stalling for time so my slide can come up. Thanks. So it's really important for Healthwatch to maintain that independence. There is that risk that go native, I think was the term we said earlier, about going native. You need to be independent so you can scrutinise and hold to account. But there is a fine balance between critical friend and a critic. And for me, the difference is being heard or having a mechanism to be heard in a meaningful way. But then also it's around context and have a greater understanding. So the NHS, working within the NHS, and a lot of you will know this, people are queuing up to tell you what's going wrong and you need to fix it. Every day of the week, there'll be a new policy, there'll be new guidance, there'll be new reports, there'll be media, there'll be hundreds and hundreds of people saying you need to do better. Now, and I just wanted to illustrate the point really, it's really important that we do it in a strategic and joined up way. Otherwise, all Healthwatch and others are doing is just adding to the noise, frankly. And we have used the word banging on, haven't we? So for example, and I agree, you should keep banging on about all the issues that matter for you and matter for our patients and public. The problem is if you do that and no one's listening, then all you are doing is banging on about it. And one of the key issues is, so you might raise an issue on dentistry. So this is what you're hearing. We're talking about dentistry, really important. No one's listening to us. The issue, in my opinion, is this is what the NHS hears on a minute by minute, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We hear about issues with A&E, with GPs, with mental health, urgent care, governance, quality, performance, you name it. I mean, that's just a tip of the iceberg. But that's what we're hearing all the time. We need to improve that. We need to improve this. What are you doing about that? So it's no wonder that dentistry might get lost. So you need to have clear routes of communications with the system and within the system. So how can you do that? So for me, the three things we need to do in terms of building that critical friend and making it as valuable as you can do is having clear mechanisms within the ICB and the system where you can raise it. some of the meetings, a program of work, it probably isn't the right way of doing it. But I think you need a clear line of communications with senior members of staff or programs, both operational and strategic. And I think one thing, just reflecting on how we've worked in Sussex, is Health Watch on a monthly basis. Originally, you had meetings with Chief Executive. Latterly, it's been with myself. You've got regular meetings with Jane, and they are meetings where Health Watch can raise issues and things like what Jane said. They can raise those early flags of this isn't working. We need to do something around that. Really, really invaluable. But if you don't have that mechanism, you risk just straying into just raising issues that no one can do anything about and in an unmeaningful way. Secondly, it's around the reporting. So there's been many examples where Health Watch has produced reports, fantastic reports, but they're not aligned to programs. They're not aligned to it being in any governance. So in a sense, they go nowhere. And I'm sure members in the room can reflect where that's happened. Now, what we need to do is understand what you're reporting on, what you're working in, how that is locked into the governance, so we know that we can do something about it and we will do something about it. And then finally, the media, which we all love. It's around working with system partners with some of the media. Now, that's not around stifling or changing what's said, but it's around making sure that everyone is aligned. And I think we've got quite a good working practice, particularly with David, who when you're in the media, you might have a phone call with us, you let us know, and then we talk about some of the issues, we can align some messages, but it's not all around you just towing the party line. He is going to say, I'm going to have a bit of a go at you guys, in the way that David does say those things. But it's really, really useful for us because we know it's coming, we can understand it. And actually we're working together with media stories because we don't deny that things happen and things need to be said in the media. We all know how it works, but we should do it in a partnership way, in my opinion. And just on the last point, it's really, really important, particularly with our workforce. So every time there's a negative media story in what it does, I can't overemphasize what it does to our workforce in terms of morale, how they feel about it, etc. If you lose the commitment and the respect, if you like, of the workforce, then you've lost the dressing room, to coin a footballing analogy. And I do think there is a risk sometimes in terms of Health Watch, particularly talking to some of my provider colleagues, where they see Health Watch as a critic rather than a critical friend. And I think it's because they haven't seen that we've been working together on some of the big issues, but particularly in what's reporting in the media. And then finally, strategic partner. So what does that mean? That for me is the biggest change that we'll see. So Health Watch no longer just sitting on the sidelines commentating, if you like. We are all part of the system. It is all of us. It's not me, it's not just Stephen, it is all of us as part of the system. And Health Watch will be involved at many different levels. So we talked about the assembly earlier today, the place-based partnerships, health and wellbeing boards, and the programme. I did reflect just coming here that actually Health Watch are more involved in system-wide working than I am, because you're so integrated within all of those areas. So you've got the ability to influence decision-making in the assurance process more than ever. But I think we need to do is what does that mean for Health Watch? How can you be different? Because it's not just around being a delivery partner, not just around doing a bit of engagement, that's your involvement, or the critical friend. How do you actually work differently? So I think we need to be really clear on what the role of Health Watch is on all of those programs. That's not just you're at the table. What are you there to do? What's your representation? What's your accountability? What's your responsibility? So how are you going to act and be within those programs and those forums? I think we need to have a system where you're part of the check and challenge for the engagement process. So Jane talked about the governance. Now everyone rolls their eyes and yawns when we talk about governance normally. it's extremely important, particularly in engagement, that it runs through all our government's processes. I'll come into the last point in a minute. So how can you be part of that check and challenge? And we're developing a population involvement panel, which Healthwatch will be chairing, which I think is a mechanism to do that. But how can you be part of that check and challenge so we're not marking our own homework? And then finally, on formal reporting. So we talked about representation a lot. Now, I've got quite strong views. If you have to have a representative model around involving public engagement or involvement, then you're not doing it properly. That's when you know you failed, because obviously you can't have 1.7 million people around the table, and that's what we're trying to achieve metaphorically. So the reporting in this is extremely important. So how can you make sure that the work of Healthwatch and the reportings that you do and everything you do is within the programs of work, but within the reporting structure? Because one of the questions around how will the ICP or the board, the ICB, really hear the patient's voice? Now, it will be through the reporting. There won't be 1.7 million people sat in the corner. It will be within the reporting. That's where it will be seen. That's when people will see that's evidenced, okay? So although we might yawn around this, because this is the boring bit, it's extremely important that those two parts, you're heavily involved within the check and challenge of the engagement process, but then it is loud and clear within the reports that are being cited, because the reporting is what then informs the decision making, and that's where we'll make a difference at that sort of level. Okay, so that's enough from me. Hopefully we've got some time. So, and I think it's a really good opportunity, because this builds on what Jane has said, to have probably a collective conversation about both sessions. But these are some of the questions that I think would be good to answer. Is, do you agree with some of this? Is there anything missing? And what do you need to do, or we need to do, to strengthen or change it to make it happen? So there we go.
Thank you very much indeed. I can't imagine people are going to not have something to say about what you said. So, Tom, thank you so much. Can we show our appreciation for Tom?